So usually when I deliver a keynote like this one, and in December sometime I'll hit my 150th keynote in the last 18 months. I spent probably too much time talking about the Industrial Revolutions because they have had significant impact over the last couple hundred years. From steam, which changed the world and raised the standard of living for most of the industrialized world, to the electrification, the combustible engine, the electrification of manufacturing processes, and at the same time scientific management theory, really created the middle class in the United States and across the world. And many people associate that with Ford. And then the third industrial revolution began around 1970, some would argue a little earlier, and that began the computing age. And now we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. We have been since 2008. However, last week I was on my way to Wake Forest Innovation Quarter to work with a group in Winston-Salem of educators and industry partners. I was listening to a book on the plane, and it struck me that I've been doing a bit of a disservice to the power, the profound nature of AI. And what the age that we're entering right now really relates more to the discovery of fire 100,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago, and then with the agricultural revolution it changed the food supply. And then along with the wheel, the written word 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. These are things that had profound impact on society and on everybody's life. And now, as we look at 2015 and beyond, it's the age of AI and IoT. And so we're in the midst of it today. But oftentimes you'll hear terms out of highly intelligent people like Andrew Ng talking about AI as the new electricity. And what I'd like you to think about for the next 45 minutes or so, I'll do my best here, is AI is the new fire. AI is the new written word. Because that's the profound impact that we're looking at. And we have this tremendous responsibility once you accept that this is not simply, if you think about the slides that you just saw, over the last 5,000 years since the wheel, there's really not been anything significant enough. Think about all of that's happened in the last few hundred years with regard to technology. There's been nothing significant enough to measure up with those historic movements until now. And so the responsibility that we have over the next 25 or 30 years is to get it right. And the impact that that will have on our businesses, on our regions, on our stakeholders, our employees, are going to be significant. There's one baseline piece of information I'd like you to understand is that if you are not 65 years of age or older, you've never worked in the US economy during a sustained period of growth. That stopped in 1970. Okay? The period between 1920 and 1970, fueled by electricity, combustible engine, and other innovations of the time, were the most successful era in terms of sustained growth. But over the last 50 years, there's been a significant gap in terms of technology that's been available versus the way it's been adopted, the rate at which it's been adopted. And so what you could isolate here are the next 20 years, and when you look at the verticality of the adoption curves that are on the screen, every industrial revolution that has taken place in steam has been about 4 key areas: energy, health, communication, and transportation. Every major innovation falls under those 4 categories. Today we're talking about a 5th, which is production. For the first time, with the digitalization of production or manufacturing, this is expected to be an a period of incredible sustained growth over that 20-year period of time, fueled by the adoption of these many technologies across every industry. So, sort of doubling up on me a little bit. The next slide, oftentimes when we think about technology, we think about the coasts, especially Silicon Valley in the context of innovations that are occurring today. But the fifth computing wave, which we're in the midst of right now with cognitive compute, is actually going to most significantly impact the parts of the country where manufacturing is most significant. Okay, so where manufacturing has its biggest presence, those are the regions that will be most significantly impacted. And you can see some of the top states. When you take a look at the 8 states, of the Great Lakes states, if you will, from eastern Minnesota to upstate New York, you're talking about 100,000 of the 250,000 manufacturers in the United States, 40% of the manufacturers in the United States. There's an incredible concentration here, and the impact that cognitive compute or intelligent systems will have in manufacturing is expected to be significant. And the opportunity that we have is to reimagine. It's to reimagine the processes. This is why we can't think of this as the next electricity, because we sort of take that for granted today. When you think of it as the next fire, the next example of the written word or the wheel, there's this greater responsibility that we have to really rethink the processes like Ford did with the electrification. The reason he won, everybody electrified their factories, but he reimagined the process. He changed the way they made vehicles. He reduced the price of vehicles because of that from $840 to $250. And they dominated the marketplace. At a time where the number of registrations for vehicles in the United States went from 8,000 to millions, their market share, Ford's, went from 9% to 54%. Okay? And this was a function of not just the assembly line, which is a little simple, but it's also the division of labor. The division of labor is important, and we have to be less incremental as we think about things in order to deal with wicked problems. So here's a how many of you took philosophy in school? First semester or so. There's a problem called the trolley problem, a dilemma called the trolley problem. You are in a trolley, you're barreling down a hill, and there are 5 people in front of you. You're not the driver of that trolley, but there is a lever next to you. And if you pull that lever, the trolley will divert to a second track. And when the trolley diverts, it will certainly kill one person. So do you make the ethical decision to kill one person versus taking the chance that 5 may die? You just think about that for a second. Know that that's always been a question we didn't really have to answer other than maybe over a cup of tea. But today, if you're a programmer of an autonomous vehicle, you have to answer that question. What will the vehicle do? What safety standards will we put in place and so forth to make that a non-issue? But there are all sorts of challenges when we add intelligent technologies to the transportation and other modalities in our life that we interact with. As we add intelligent technologies, there are all sorts of new, very human questions that we have to answer and actually program into the solutions we build. And so suddenly, wicked problems become wicked opportunities to get things right. Now, there's a particular framework that Derek, are you advancing the slides so that I stay on time? There's a particular framework that I like to use in order to avoid blind spots in the thought process or in a framework that you build. And so today I'd like to talk to you about internal, external, and big picture. Internal is you and your business. External are your stakeholders, your community, your employees. Certainly we'll spend some time on workforce. And then big picture is about Walworth County. It's about the region for the sake of today's conversation. So this is the age of exponential disruption, and I think I can help you sort of quantify that. We'll get through a few statistics and then start talking about the impact of those forces that are impacting our businesses and our daily lives and our communities. According to Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, he's an economist there and the founder of the World Economic Forum, it's important to understand the concept of exponential versus linear, non-linear versus linear, okay? Because typically the systems that we design, they're extraordinarily linear. 1,000 years ago, it required human beings roughly 3 generations to adapt to new technology, new social mores, etc. 3 generations. But there wasn't a great deal of technological improvement 1,000 years ago, and so it didn't matter much. And today, our ability to adopt new technology has improved vastly. It's approximately 5 to 7 years. The challenge with that means society. That means educators, it means legislators, and so forth. Think about the scooter conundrum for every major city in the United States over the last couple of years as these last mile micro-commuting solutions hit the street in various different business models. We couldn't legislate fast enough to stay ahead of it. Some of it was bad behavior on the part of the companies, some of it was just really slow, linear processes. Around 2007, these lines intersected. As you extend these lines out, what you'll find is that an inability to adopt technologies, create new business models, and innovate causes a gap in business performance. Another way to think about that is this is where the opportunity is. So as we sit here today, we are just a few years away from $1,000 being able to afford you the computing power of one human brain. And by 2039, the human race. And other than the fact that time goes faster than any of us ever appreciate in our less contemplative modes, the future is going to happen faster than we think, because it's not simply about computing power, storage costs, bandwidth, and the other technologies that have essentially been demonetized over the last 40 years. It's also this addition of breakthroughs in every walk. If you look at this slide, what you're looking at is a century's worth of innovation in the world. There are 20 lines on this slide, and on the bottom left you'll see some of the innovations of the second industrial revolution. Electricity, the telephone, the black and white television, the radio, so forth. And as you move forward into the third industrial revolution, that's where the adoption of commercial air travel existed and so forth. And you can see some of the upper left, you can see the third and into the fourth industrial revolution. And then to the right of the slide, what you should be noticing is much greater verticality in terms of the adoption by mainstream market. Okay, so it took the telephone 76 years to hit mainstream market. It took the cell phone, the smartphone, 9 years. It's quite a bit faster, and it speaks to this 5 to 7 years that we were talking about just before. The challenge that we face today, going forward in this century, is one similar to, I think Ray Kurzweil, who's pictured here, captures it best. And it is that over the next 80 years, at today's rate of innovation, today's rate of change, the expectation is that 20,000 years of progress will take place. Okay, so if you look at the last slide and you had 20 lines, in over 100 years, that means there would be 4,000 lines in the next century of these major breakthrough technologies: the refrigerator, the telephone, electricity, black and white televisions, color televisions, gaming systems. The rest of this century ends up looking a little bit like this. Now, just because I didn't have time to put all of the lines on here, but really more so if you don't believe the prediction of 20,000 years, and you think about 1,000 years, this is what it looks like. So this is just 5% of the prediction, but essentially what he's saying is that, what this says is that instead of every 5 years, like the last century, in the century to come, we're talking about every 6 months. If Kurzweil's right, it's every 9 days. Okay, so if we believe 6 months for these innovations, which will continue to accelerate, now the challenge becomes, how quickly can we adopt? How quickly will new technologies that we bring to market be outdated before it ever hits mainstream market? There will be many more failures than ever. And as it relates to industrial technologies, business-to-business technologies, smart factory, etc., the major concern that the consulting firms have is one of paralysis, which is, it's one thing to stand in line for the next iPhone. But if I have to bet $250,000 on the next technology that will help me catapult my business forward, and there's something that's 3 to 6 months away, because that's what happens in our century, or 9 days, when do I make the decision to buy? Now, that doesn't mean we have to go from a 1 to a 5 or from 0 to 100 overnight. There are ways to engineer these systems to be more incremental and the investments more incremental so we can prove our return on investment. These are the technologies related to Industry 4.0. It's always hard to sort of put them around in org because typically 5 or 6 of them are combined. They converge. These technologies converge in order to maximize the business value. Here's a list of more. None of these were represented on the previous slide. You don't really need to know these things. You just need to know that they're coming and that they will become a part of your business strategy, your strategic discussions to decide whether or not you're going to adopt a particular technology to move your business forward or your life forward. And so the question becomes, how do you future-proof your business? This is John Chambers from TENXEcosystem, and this is a famous statistic, not because he said it, but because everybody says it. And it's not a very nice one, which is that, there's this principle of creative destruction. In times of extraordinary innovation, companies go away. There have always been winners and losers. There will always be winners and losers, and in the next decade or so, the business outcomes will vary more widely than ever. And so, on one end of the spectrum, we have this challenge that approximately 40% of businesses will cease to exist in a meaningful way in the next 10 years. It's a fun exercise to take a look at the Fortune 500 or even the Wisconsin-based 9 Fortune 500 companies and say, which 3 or 4? It's less fun when you think about 9,200 manufacturers in the state of Wisconsin. You think about these 8 global forces, internal, external, big picture, mindset issues, straight up demographic issues, lots of businesses for sale over the next decade. Private equity companies are well aware. Companies planning roll-ups are well aware. Discounts are expected to be taken based on the fact that minimal investments aren't being made around areas like data analytics, simple automation, things that have to be in place in the next 3 to 5 years if you're on that exit horizon. We're going to spend some time on the middle box, but on the big picture we have digital globalization. Globalization we're not talking about containers on ships here, we're talking about digital skill sets. The ability that companies have to outsource offshore to Asia, in this century to the African continent, where much of the population growth is expected. Population drives manufacturing. It drives middle-class spending, and it drives manufacturing. And the population growth that will occur between now and 2050, as we get to 9 billion people, or 2100, when we get to 11 billion people, most of that growth will actually occur in Southeast Asia and the African continent, and they will be manufacturing centers. The ability that companies will have to outsource to Africa will be the new India. They will be the cost leaders to begin with. So, how do we deal with these forces? I focus some on manufacturing, mostly in Wisconsin and then around the country, but there are 9,200 manufacturers in the state of Wisconsin. There are 476,000 people employed. That's essentially 1 out of 6 employees in the state. It's 18% of the GDP. In the 7-county region that includes Walworth, it's 35% of tradable goods. The eastern half of Wisconsin is much more highly concentrated in manufacturing than 18%. 7 out of 8 manufacturers. So of that 9,200, there are approximately 1,000 that produce products. 8,000 plus companies produce components for those products. So when we apply 40% attrition to 9,200, it's 3,700 companies. The picture is not a great one. It looks a lot like this one, right? 40% attrition over the last 10 years, much deeper if you go back 50 years. We produce more dairy products than ever in Wisconsin today, but we do it with 7,800 farms instead of 60,000. That's the sort of industry out there. Everybody in a good mood? All right, so let's talk about what we can do about it. There's this concept which actually started in pig farming in Iowa in 1962 called the Diffusion of Innovation. In 1991, Jeffrey Moore wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm. It sort of became the marketing Bible for technology companies. But what he talked about were there are innovators and early adopters. That's the first 16% of the market. there's the early majority. And what the book said is if you can't get to the early majority, your company will likely stagnate and ultimately die. So you need to figure out a way to get beyond the early adopters to the early majority. Today, I think there's an entirely different chasm. And that one is from the buy side. So as business owners, as community leaders, we need to be looking at the opportunity to have people finding ways to make decisions fast enough to be in the first half of the market. The reason for that is this hype curve. When you apply this curve, which is a Gartner hype curve, to this chasm theory, you find that the business value is in the first half of the market. After that, you're playing catch up, and you can't maximize or optimize value for an individual business or a region of businesses. Okay? So the thought becomes, how do we become more proficient at adopting technology? Some of that is a mindset challenge. Some of it is the way we are sold to. Some of it is the way we make decisions and buy. But the requirement over the next decade for every business is to find ways to continually build momentum. Propulsion, constant propulsion, continuous improvement. Okay? This adaptability. As you see this rapid change, markets will change more rapidly than ever. Business outcomes will be more widely varied than ever. And the opportunity that we have is to find ways to work together to build the value. So my job today is not really, I don't want to convince you or try to convince you of anything. I really just want to put you in a position where you're thinking about this a little differently, maybe with a little more data behind you, a little more perspective, so that you decide that it's time for you to personally and for the sake of your business formulate some response. Some potential responses could be establishing speed as a core value. How many of you have speed as a core value in your business today? It becomes a necessary component. Not reckless speed, not reckless abandon, but just the thought of it doesn't need to be perfect. Right? It's an Amazon principle and among many other cultures of innovation. How do we move a little bit faster rather than trying to get everything perfect? Build a culture of innovation. Anecdotally, not statistically, but anecdotally, as I talk to the commercial lenders around the state, around the Midwest really, we talk about the level of innovation that's occurring within manufacturing, whether it be on the production and delivery side of in terms of implementing technologies to increase customer satisfaction, to improve the customer journey, to optimize operations, etc., or on the new product development side. The anecdotal number is that less than 10% of companies are actively innovating. Less than 10. And so the question becomes, how do we change that? How do we change that mindset? If you're one of the 8,000 plus component suppliers, process manufacturers in Wisconsin, what are you waiting for in terms of your 2-decade-long customer relationships to deliver a new spec to your business to add a sensor, a smart sensor to the component you've made for the last 8 years? When will be the right time for you to have the capability to approach your customer with that innovative concept to say, what if we did this? Could that lead to a stronger customer relationship? Could that lead to an improved customer lifetime value if you became part of the innovation solution? And then lastly, on this slide, the smart connected economy. This is an economy that's a $25 trillion market. It is the combination of IoT and AI. It starts with IoT. We have to be censoring things. The number of connected devices in the next 5 years will increase by 5x. 5 times growth in the number of connected devices. How many of those can come from Wisconsin? Okay. So let's switch to the workforce of the future. You might see, I have to just press off here. You might see the future of robotics and their involvement in your business like this, where robotics, this might be a little bit like a cobot. It helps you lift up the people. Or you might see it like this, and some of the people that work for you and work with you might see it like this. a little slightly more dystopian view. Regardless of how you view it, when will you formulate a response as a business around robotics? People that see it as a solution point to this statistic, that as hard as it is, with 3% unemployment essentially, to find people to fill the roles today, it's only going to get more difficult in the next 10 years. There will be 5 million fewer people in the workforce. Simple demographics, people retiring versus people of the age to enter the workforce. So the challenge that we have to attract and acquire new talent is harder than ever, backed up by that chart. Now, 87%, 7 out of 8 employers thinking about automation and intelligent technologies are planning to increase the number of jobs that they have as a function of that. So you'd think you'd feel pretty good about it, but job growth will be highly distributed and highly uneven throughout the United States. This is a McKinsey study from about probably 2 months ago now. It actually breaks it down by county. I would encourage you to have a quick look at the data. You know, whenever automation has come to be like these power looms, that picture was of Edward Ludlam. His friends called him Ned. Ned Ludd, the Luddites. When we think about Luddites today, those are people that don't necessarily react well to new technology. What they really didn't react well to was the wholesale firing of artisan workers in the textile mills. They replaced those multi-generation artisans with people from the fields who could very easily operate a power loom. It turns out that throughout time, when you threaten somebody's ability to put food on the table, there's an uprising. And this is the challenge that we face even today. This article is 2 weeks old. Every industrial revolution has been fear of robots, there's been fear of automation, there was fear that computers were going to take everybody's job as well. And it continues on today. That's why websites like this exist. This is an actual website. You can plug in your title. I encourage you to jump on your phone right now, plug in your title, and see if you should sit in the room or not. The issue here is that there will be great disruption, and it's important to understand the mindset of your workforce, of your team, of your family members who might be feeling similarly. This statistic from McKinsey and World Economic Forum talks to the point that perhaps as many as 1 out of 4 workers in the world will be displaced, meaning they have to change jobs, 1 out of 4. This is a much larger issue than the jobs you can't fill today because you can't find the people, because you can't hire the people. It's a much more significant issue is the reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling of the individuals that are part of your incumbent workforce. Almost half of those 800 million are likely to have to change job descriptions to the point where they'll have an entirely different category than they're in today. This is a great deal of rework that needs to be done and change that needs to be managed during this next decade. This is a 2030 statistic. The most concerning statistic that you'll see today is this one. Today is the eve of 2020. What this says is that if you have a 70-person company, roughly 40 of them, 38 of them, have to be reskilled, upskilled, or new skilled by 2022. Okay. If you have 500 people, roughly 280 of them have to be reskilled in the next 3 years at a cost of $24,800 per employee on average. Now this, if you do it on your own. However, there's other research. This is from October of last year. But January of this year, there was other research that came out that said, you know, if we did this on a regional basis, let's take, for instance, Walworth County as opposed to the 7 counties. The cost of reskilling could be as low as $5,000 to $10,000 per employee. So if you own a business right now, just do the math on $15,000 savings times approximately half your workforce. And know that because of the disruption and change in technology over the next century, but certainly over the next couple of decades, if you intend to hang on to your business for that long, this will be a constant need. And so the opportunity to reduce costs by sharing and building joint training programs and working closely with incredible organizations like Gateway, which is this jewel of an asset that we have in southeastern Wisconsin, with the #1 Industry 4.0 training center at the IMET Center in Sturtevant in America, right, by all accounts. You can talk to every robotics, mechatronics, every vendor. This is the #1 place. They're doing some pretty cool things in Ohio, but Wisconsin gets it right in terms of high school and college training, and certainly Gateway is the leading example there, and their leadership team is leading some of that conversation on a national level. So I would rather pay $5,000 or $10,000 per employee on an ongoing basis rather than trying to figure out how to budget for $25,000 per employee. And then what that equates to is approximately 200 hours per year. So that slides at hard costs. Don't forget about the costs related to paying them while they're being trained, right? And the conversation about, can that be during working hours? Can you afford 5 weeks a year of additional learning time? Sort of a Google rule of 10%, 20%, right? 20%, 10% of the week going to learning. We good with that? I don't think that conversation has started in too many businesses in earnest. But know that this is not 2030 or 2050 or further out. It's 2022. Significant amount of disruption. Right now, if I graduate high school and I go get a $15 an hour job at the Amazon Fulfillment Center doing pick and pack, they will also fund 95% of my education. And there's a Gateway campus on the Amazon campus. And certainly many more within a certain radius, right? So $17.50 an hour doesn't get it done. This generation is interested in understanding where they're going next. And by the way, this generation is not, I'm not talking about Gen Z. I'm talking not only about millennials. I'm talking about all of us. Continuous learning is a lovely cliche, but it is now necessary. I think during my week-long introduction, not Greg's fault, the bio's fault, I talked about 2 certificates that I've achieved over the last couple of years. I'm 50 years old. I'm on the advisory board for supply chain at Marquette University. The cost of that master's degree was $35,000. So I don't need a master's degree in supply chain. So what I decided to do was take a look at what programs were available to me, and for $1,180, I have a certificate, a credential from MIT. And so that's 1 credit hour in the master's degree program. Now, I don't need a master's degree, many people do, so there's different paths, but what's being worked on right now in the Higher Education Regional Alliance, which is another unprecedented and unparalleled effort around education in Wisconsin, is, among other things, shared resources, shared facilities, shared curriculum, shared staff. In addition to that, stacked credentials, innovative programming to find ways to give people some credential after 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, as opposed to requiring an accredited, credit-bearing class for everything. Right? There will be many different, we have to be adaptive to what the needs are. If some 50-year-old person is looking for some additional baseline foundational information with regard to a given area of study, we need to be able to put ourselves in a position to deliver that. So these are things that are being worked on, and I want to encourage you as employers to be involved in that thought process, to help start building the pathways for individuals. As Accenture looks at every role on your team, in your organization, they break it into 3 categories. That which is uniquely human, that which can be augmented, and that which can be automated. When you look at the data attached to that, all you really need to do, you don't need to read the eye chart, you just need to look at the combination of blue and gray and recognize that for 9 out of the 10 job categories, part of the role can either be augmented or automated. More than 80% of the role can be automated or augmented. So where are you in terms of thinking about the pathways in your organization for your employees to grow as you apply automation? This doesn't have to be about manufacturing and robotics. This can be about artificial intelligence technologies in your customer service team or your HR team or your accounting team. These roles are going to change significantly, and the challenge that we have, and it's one best taken on by regions instead of individuals, is to find ways to build new standards, to define these roles and create the career ladders that are available to us. It's what Deloitte calls super jobs. So, yeah, exactly. But AI, but I can't work a clicker. So Deloitte they think about standard jobs as we think about them, and then there are hybrid jobs because as automation comes in, roles will change. Some people on your 5-person team will do something else, and the hybrid role will be left for the people that are remaining in that position. And then when you add computing technologies, they can widen the scope of their role because the intelligent technologies will help them what Deloitte calls perform super jobs, which are parts of the role we've never thought of before. You've probably seen this slide, but 2022 jobs landscape, you can see the great emphasis on data, technology, in every company, in every role. And this is always an interesting statistic that 2 out of 3 young students today will have a job that doesn't exist, and that sounds fictional. But if you take a look at these jobs that are just now becoming available, this is around 50 jobs, a lot of strange titles in there, that will be here. Right? Because human beings have to keep the technology straight. Now, learning in the flow of life. Here's the old paradigm. Learn, work, retire. Maybe keep working a little bit. These days, if you talk to, you look at the data, you don't just talk to people, but talking to people and look at the data. About 3 out of 4 people at retirement age are expecting to remain in their current role of just 15 to 20 hours a week, which sounds great because we want to keep that institutional knowledge. Where appropriate, we want that mentoring in our organization. But at the same time, we've never dealt with that from an HR standpoint. Right? That's a level of complexity in every business that we've never really dealt with before. Well, he just wants to hang out 15 to 20 hours a week, but he'd like the same pay if that's okay. Right? So think about that. Is that okay at 65? Is that okay at 70? Is that okay at 75 as life elongates? As careers elongate? These are things that we'll be taking on. But that old model of front-loading education is gone, and what we're doing now is taking a look at a paradigm of learn, work, and it's a continuous cycle throughout our careers, all of us. Doesn't matter if you're on the other side of 50. You will have to learn something in the next 10 years during your career. Formally learn something. Be trained, get a certificate, get a credential. It's these skills. Technical skills are extraordinarily important, but as I go around the country, mostly at the behest of Dr. Albrecht, and I work with 2-year schools and 4-year schools throughout the country, we oftentimes talk about these 15 skills, and many of them match what's in the annual report, from the WCETA annual report at your tables. These very human skills become extraordinarily important if you're looking for people to fill roles in the middle. Those jobs that have not been created yet. But in addition to that, there's this need, a greater need, more so than ever before, to actively collaborate. Not just collaborate, but converge. So how can you future-proof the workforce? Here are just a few thoughts. Pathways. This is a term that's very common for those in training or education and so forth. But it used to be a lot easier to define a career path. That lateral and linear career path for somebody when they walk in the door. Today, it's much more dynamic. Can't expect people to be there for more than 6 or 7 years, but they're expecting you to put them in a position to move on to something better, which means they want to acquire skills during the time that they're with you. Is that okay? If I'm a $15 an hour employee at Amazon, I can be getting my nursing associate's degree. at the same time. Because their message is, from an employee attraction standpoint, come work for us, we'll set you up for life. Right? We'll put you on the path that you want to be on. And that's how they get $15 an hour employees to stay for 2 years instead of the 3 to 6 months that they were last. And by the way, 2.5 years is what software companies average. So it's pretty great performance in terms of what that ROI is on that spend. We need to put human beings at the center of everything we're doing, every system we design in our organization. Whether we're building pathways, just want to go over a couple of things. Whether we're establishing, like speed, continuous learning as a core value. Whether we ourselves as leaders, business leaders, have to understand the impact that technological innovation is having on the mindsets of the workforce. How many of us go to work every day in fear that we'll ultimately be replaced by some automated technology? And then building a regional talent ecosystem. So there's a common theme here, which is around innovation, being people-centric. At a time when 54% of workers needs to be reskilled, and only a third are actively engaged, and in fact almost one out of four are actively disengaged at work. There's this unique opportunity we have to build pathways with people in mind. Now it's an oversimplification, but it's sort of the Amazon philosophy on, and we'll fund your education. But if we can develop systems and processes and pathways for individuals, we have a much better job at talent retention, much better chance at talent retention in our businesses, if we can design something where they find purpose and value, especially if it's something they can move on to, maybe even outside of our organization. And I recognize that that's an extraordinary paradigm shift for businesses, small, medium, and large. But it's where the workforce is, and we need to meet them there. Now, this last piece is about the need to do this together. The very largest companies in the world do not do this on their own. They collaborate. Ford and Volkswagen are collaborating today on new product designs to take on the electric vehicle manufacturers. There are partnerships and ecosystems that are being built throughout the world by the largest, most powerful companies for one reason, so they remain relevant. And if you're not part of the innovation, smart, connected economy today, will you or your customer be relevant in 3 years? That company that provides you with 18% of your revenue every year through a 15-year relationship that you've had supplying components, will they be relevant or will they be disrupted? We need to solve these issues together. The challenge with that is that technology is exponential, but every system we've ever built, the way we're wired, is linear. I'll give you an example. Tesla. Every hour of operation, every smart connected vehicle produces 4 terabytes of data. And Tesla has access to that. They don't use all of it, but there are 5 signals, the 5 telemetries listed on the right, that help them improve the autonomous driving system in their car. Okay? And then every time they do a software upgrade, the entire fleet benefits. So if we all drove around in Teslas, the way I drive would benefit all of you, and the way each of you drive would benefit me, and so on. And that is exponential. Because it's the convergence of information, of data. Most small and medium-sized businesses in this region, small businesses, think of it as 250 employees or fewer, do not produce enough data on their own to maximize the results of business intelligence, advanced data analytics, and so forth. You can have an incremental impact. But by finding ways, and Microsoft is pushing hard on this right now, finding ways to have an open data platform to share information, especially machine learning data and so forth, between companies is the only way that small and medium-sized businesses will be able to truly leverage these technologies. So for every investment that we're thinking about making, make sure that your company on its own can actually benefit like the large companies can. And if you can't, the opportunity is to form communities of companies who are working on the same stuff. There's no reason why any company in here should be paying, forgive me all accounting firms and advisory firms in the room, $1,000 an hour for a couple of partners to come down to decide what the first 10 business metrics are that matter beyond your financials. If this were 1978, that would be a laminated sheet in a 3-ring binder. And today, we need to create that 3-ring binder so that perhaps the 12 metrics that I find most important aren't the same 12 as Derek. Maybe we have a different level of priority around each of those. That's simple data visualization, but we need to stop the process of educating one-on-one. By using something like capability maturity modeling, which is just a 1 to 5 scale, if I'm a 1, if this side of the room is filled with 1s and 2s, and you're all 3s, 4s, and 5s, we can't really do much together. We can do this. We can convene. People are really good at convening. But we don't converge. And we can't find ways to work together for 90 days because you're 2 years ahead of us. Why would you do all the heavy lifting? You'll let me buy you lunch. Don't get me wrong. You'll feel really smart and I'll feel better informed. But in terms of lifting up the capability of our organization, we need to find ways to curate groups. And there are frameworks that exist to do this, and it's not that hard. To pair current state and target state, to pair priorities, and actually work together. I'm not talking about work together with the company that you run into 8 days a week with quoting. I'm talking about the company that's down the street that is in a similar but not the same business as you, or maybe the same business, but you actually supply one another and you're less competitive and you just don't compete on the paradigms from the 80s and 90s. This is the challenge in front of us, and if the region wants to take a lead, like Walworth County, if a region wants to take a lead, it would be about speed and collaboration. It would be about creating an expertise not just around innovation and new product development and design, but also our ability to adopt and leverage technologies, the ability to create closed loops on data, to get much more signal like Tesla or like Mark Forge, which was the picture that was up, a 3D printing company, has grown 12,000% in the last 3 years. Greg Mark, the CEO, who was pictured on the last slide, was telling me a couple of weeks ago at an event in Milwaukee that they have 10,000 machines in the field today, 3D printers. Every week, 6 of them sit down, including Greg, and they do a review of 10 jobs that didn't go well, that didn't print well. He's an MIT mechanical engineer, okay? 6 people, 10 jobs a week. They also have an AI doing the same work, and today, the human beings still outperform the AI. And they believe there's a 12 to 18-month fuse there, where the AI will actually, from a quality standpoint, outperform the human beings, 12 to 18 months. The difference today is that those 6 people, the business can afford to do 10 jobs a week. The AI can already do 10 a second. So the exponential ability to leverage the data of every 3D printing job that runs through a Mark Forge printer is what makes the technology and the company exponential, because the software upgrade that will occur across the network of 10,000 printers will impact everybody. Meanwhile, here's the everybody part. This is what it looks like. Everybody benefits. When we implement technology as individual businesses, or we implement new workforce strategies, here's what it looks like. And that's it. Right? Just the upper left. But that's 10 companies, so it's actually this. And then we all do this. And we do this without telling anybody, whether the result is green, red, or yellow. Whether it was a great result. If it's a great result, we don't want anybody to know that we did something that might offer a 3 to 6 month competitive edge. And if it's a bad result, heaven forbid anybody knows that we messed up. Where we would benefit and make this much more exponential is by sharing data in these discretely organized projects. We can go much faster and make smaller bets. You don't have to spend $150,000. You can divide that by 10. You could include 10 companies and innovate more often, achieve more within your budget in the same year. So how can we future-proof Walworth County? Sorry, Darwin, survival of the fittest. You have to collaborate. You have to be adaptive. Change. And business leaders have to drive that change. The willingness to come together. It simply takes frameworks to reorganize work. I'm not suggesting it's easy. I am suggesting I've spent 2 years involved in building the frameworks, and they exist, and you can work together immediately. It's simply a dynamic group of cross-industry partners working together to design, build, and implement value-added technology solutions. It's just a network of networks. All of you have got your own business network. If you brought that to a group of 10 companies who were actually working together to implement some new solution around data, to get from a 1 to a 1.4 in 90 days at a cost of X divided by 10. Much more efficient. And the closed loop on the results would inform that next community, that next cohort. Meanwhile, you get to learn about cybersecurity from them. Every major analyst firm, and I've sadly studied all of them and synthesized the data and picked midpoints, every major analyst firm in the last 6 months has written about ecosystems. 7 of the 12 largest companies in the world are based on ecosystems. $60 trillion, or 30% of revenue worldwide by 2025 will come from digital ecosystems, 50% of corporate revenue by 2030. 3 out of 4 CEOs believe that their existing business models, this is 1,250 CEOs talking to Accenture, their existing business models will be irrelevant within 5 years, and that ecosystems will be a primary agent of change. 5 out of 6 believe that they're an important part of their strategy, and 5 out of 8 would build one on their own to disrupt their industry. So I built TENX Manufacturing. We started in the spring of this year. There are 118 manufacturers. There are 54 qualified service providers. The basic principle is this. I built the frameworks by which companies like Plastic Oil qualify to do business with Foxconn. They're receiving an award today. They should get another one for their level of customer satisfaction. The basic principle of an ecosystem approach is it's not for everybody. This doesn't save the 40% of companies who don't want to make investments. That's a business decision. The companies that want to grow and go faster have an opportunity to participate for a fraction of the cost. We take high-performing manufacturers, we pair them with high-performing service providers, and we create closed-loop data cycles, and the probability of better business outcomes, more predictable business outcomes, is higher. It's a much different way than doing it on your own. The map looks a little bit like this today. This is about 60% accurate with various stakeholder groups. It ties right into the higher ed. We work on these challenges, talent gap, the entire continuum from attraction to retention with learning and development and onboarding and so forth in between. Implementing Industry 4.0 and new product development. We create ecosystems of manufacturers, surround them with experts that are high performers. We help. Here's another major issue. This is one of the last points. If I'm a 1 today, great. You can come and sell me a 4. You can try. You can sell me the vision of a 4. Tomorrow, I can only be a 2. There are very few leapfrogs that occur in this world as it relates to capability and maturity in a company. I might need to understand the vision in order to make that investment, but I really, as it relates to cybersecurity, automation, AI, data analytics, and things that impact every business, I need to be a 2. And I need to understand what the shortest path to that is with the highest probability of success. And that's what we do by surrounding them with experts, companies that deliver. That's the approach. Minimum viable transformation. That's the approach. How can we have vision for what excellence looks like, what the leaders in industry are doing, but achieve it incrementally? Incremental investment, incremental resource utilization, and more collaboration than ever before. And more data, more proof points than ever before. And again, human-centric design, whether you're building an ecosystem or a product. But I want to say thank you again to Derek and to the gents here. Greg for the nice introduction, and to all of you for your time. That's well past my time. Thanks for listening.